Congress approving a bill preventing any U.S. president from withdrawing from NATO without approval from the Senate or an act of Congress. Measures included in the recently passed National Defense Authorization Act. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine and Republican Senator Marco Rubio spearheaded that bill, which marks Congress's commitment to the NATO alliance.
And so we can't support Ukraine. Their chief advisor yesterday said they're likely to lose this war if they lose U.S. support. And Putin gets all of Ukraine, then what? Then where does he go? Because right then, he's up against the eastern flank of NATO. And if you think the cost of supporting Ukraine is high now, just imagine how much higher it's going to be, not just in national treasure, but in American blood, if he starts going after one of our NATO allies. Because as the president also said, we take our Article 5 commitments very seriously.
I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years. Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined.
In it, current and former administration officials, speaking, of course, from behind the protective veil of anonymity, because honestly, you don't know what the KGB or whatever it's called these days is capable of doing to people who tell the truth. But they nevertheless divulged that on multiple occasions over the last year, the president has privately floated the idea of pulling the United States out of NATO. Let that sink in. Leaving NATO. This is a huge story. Or it would have been a huge story in 1983 when the Soviet Union still existed and it was still clear what the point of NATO was. NATO, you remember, was created to keep the Soviets from invading Western Europe, and NATO did a very good job of that all the way until the very day the Soviet Union collapsed. That was the summer of 1991. It was almost 28 years ago. So why do we still have NATO? Well, nobody really knows. In Washington, you're definitely not allowed to ask. And that's a shame because it would be an interesting conversation. Remaining in NATO comes with significant obligations. In the 1990s, our leaders decided it would be a wise idea to promise countries like Latvia and Estonia that we would use nuclear weapons to protect them if they ever had a problem with Russia. Why did we do that? Well, who knows? The details are lost to history. But the point is, we did that. Article 5 obligates the United States to protect any NATO ally that is threatened. So how do we feel about that now? Are you ready to launch a nuclear war over Latvia? What do you think of sending your kids to defend the territorial integrity of Estonia? Our foreign policy establishment thinks it's well worth it. In fact, under our current rules of membership in NATO, we would have no choice. You might not have known that. All of this might merit a national debate of some sort at some point when we're ready 28 years in. But no, the left isn't into national debates anymore. They're into screaming and threats and criminal investigation and other forms of coercion. They like things the way they are in this country. They're benefiting hugely from the status quo, and they don't like being challenged. They consider asking difficult questions a criminal act. Just this morning, in fact, Preet Bharara, he's the most famous former federal prosecutor in the country, explained this view on Twitter. He said this, quote, "If true, Trump should immediately and publicly state his apparent wish to withdraw from NATO so he can be promptly impeached, convicted, and removed from office," unquote. In other words, talking about leaving NATO isn't simply unwise, according to our leaders. It's an impeachable offense. Lots of famous and powerful people in Washington think this. Watch.
Withdrawing from NATO, even discussion about the withdrawing from NATO, I think it would be disastrous for the security.
I think that act would be so destructive to our country. It would be a ground for some profound effort by our part, whether it's impeachment or the 25th Amendment. He can't do that to this country. And I don't believe that he can do it without Senate ratification.
Did you catch that? The 25th Amendment. In other words, according to a sitting member of Congress, someone who's there right now, rethinking membership in NATO isn't just treasonous and criminal, though obviously it is. It's also prima facie evidence of insanity. You're not fit to govern if you say that. You probably shouldn't drive a car, just in the interest of public safety.